And we're live. Hello, everyone.
Hello?
Hey there. How are you, Manny? So, if you are saying anything, I cannot hear you. Hello, Manny. Can you hear me? Um. Well, for the people tuning in on the stream, I did have a Madoka post a while ago. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. I see a thumbs up from you, Manny. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear you. And it looks like the app isn't detecting any speech from you either. Although sometimes it will also fail to do that. Let me just. Bear with me for a few moments as we figure out the audio.
Hello?
Yes, I hear you now. This is the first time
Okay.
I heard you. You are still a bit quiet, although I
Okay.
can turn you up on my end. I don't know how well the audience can hear you. I don't know if there are people here yet. We're just chilling.
Yeah, there's nobody else here. Um, yeah, I think it was you have to click request to speak or something, I think on the app,
I see. Space
even if they're not
settings.
approved.
Oh, it might not be. It might also not be natively recorded, but I am rebroadcasting this on YouTube. I think I might have forgotten to click recorded space, but I guess if people aren't joining, if people
Yeah,
join, then I'll
we
let
can
them know. I'll like manually let them know. But
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Or we can
Uh,
restart it if you want. If you want, we can restart it. That way we cut out the awkward part in the beginning and it's recorded. Do you want to just do that?
yeah, for sure. Although like the stream
Okay.
is rolling on YouTube, but let's restart the space. That'll make it
Okay.
easier for the recording.
Perfect. I'll do that. I'll just turn off the app and then come back in.
And we're back. It should be properly categorized now as a recorded space. And we're back. Okay, should be properly categorized now as a recorded space. We should be ready to roll. Manny, I just accepted your invite to speak, so you should be able to speak.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, loud and clear. We're rolling.
Perfect. Perfect. We're rolling. All right, all right. Let's get the show on the road then. Um, well, I'll let you set the agenda. I think you had a few ideas on where to go. I did read your Madoka post, by the way, last night, which I thought was very good. So if you haven't
Yeah,
subscribed to Brian, you should.
yeah. I will put that Substack post in the reply to the space. But right, we ended up deciding to do this space because we were talking about Atlas Shrugged last week, and a lot of people
Hmm.
joined us for that. And as it turns out, like we were talking about, the essence of morality of people, like facing the consequences of their actions, facing the consequences of either their contradictions, their compromises, and how we were getting in modern times we were getting a new genre of literature that was really expressing this in a way that hadn't been for I think several decades, if not centuries. And that's the context where you brought up Madoka Magica. Do you want to explain the premise of Madoka Magica?
I was going to defer that to you. I'm always
That
a
that's
little bit
fine. That's
wary of
fine.
describing it too much, just because I don't want to spoil it. Like for me,
Oh,
so
I'm
I'll just
merciless.
give a
I'm
little
just
bit of
gonna spoil
context.
it.
I mean, when I watched this show, I had never seen a magical girl show, anyways. So this was my first one, and it is the deconstruction of the genre in some way. So it was quite a unique experience. I'll let you describe it and summarize it.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because I had the same experience. I think we're in the Madoka has become the mainstream now, right?
Yeah.
And it's become the mainstream not just within like anime or whatever, but it's become the mainstream. The idea that you're gonna subvert the genre, that's become just like commonplace in like every genre.
Mm, mm,
But
yeah.
yeah, you're right that the history goes like there's this genre of like basically in anime people winning with the power of friendship and everything going well and being happy go lucky, and this was not that. This was a work with much more suffering, much more tragedy, and much more people realizing the consequences of their actions.
Hmm. Hmm.
To go back to our conversation last week, we ended up um, we ended up talking about how Ayn Rand had like a kind of hatred for her own characters, that they really deserve to suffer for some of the beliefs that they had, and suffer in a very natural way, right? Their suffering isn't coincidental; it's caused by their beliefs. And I think the
Hmm.
logic of Madoka Magica, the kind of metaphysics of Madoka Magica, work the same way. The premise
Yeah.
is basically this, right? Um, you there's this cute cat. The cute cat recruits this is like the mascot of the series. If you know anything about the series, it's probably like this cat. um and it recruits you to the premise at the beginning of the show is that it recruits you to kind of do battle against evil, and by doing battle against evil you can have your wish granted, and you're fighting this like cosmic war. That's the premise at the beginning. And the really interesting thing is that, the wishes at the beginning seem like a side point, but they become the focal point really quickly because the wishes are what unwind people.
Are
Any
you going to
thoughts on
say
that?
more about that?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I mean, so the I I mean, I guess a little bit more context for people. It's the the thing that I loved about Madoka, and I think this is the tie-in with Ayn Rand, is that the girls. So I mean, one of the one of the weird plot points, I guess, of the first half, or actually the whole, yeah, most of the movie is that Madoka, she's not a magical girl yet. She's trying to pick a wish, and she doesn't know what to pick. Like she wants to be a magical girl to help people, but she needs to make a wish, but she doesn't know what to wish for. And this is because the cat uh tells them that they basically forfeit their lives because they're now committing to basically being child soldiers. So they should make sure that it's like a really important wish. And what we see is there's a time looping element in the series where one of the characters is going back and restarting a timeline something like 50 times, right? I think canonically something like this. Like she spends like an additional 13 years, I guess, looping through the same month. And what she notices is that the girls, no matter how much she tries to save them from making wishes, they always end up making the same wish. And what's interesting is the wish is always, I mean, this is, I guess, the part where we can talk more about like the nature of the wishes and why they phrase them that way and so on. But they always make the same wish. And the way that I interpreted this was they make the same wish because they're the same people. Like in some ways, the wish is a particular type of it's a little bit of evidence of their own like particular ethics and their ability for self-deception. Like a lot of characters, and you make this point very beautifully, make wishes that sound altruistic, but they're actually truly selfish. But they don't want to feel like they're being selfish, so then they wish for something that's not the thing that they truly wish for. But a lot of it is just like an outgrowth of character. And I think that Ayn Rand, I mean, this is a point that comes out that hasn't come out in media for a long time, which is really like your moral fate is kind of tied to the quality of your character. Like it's not just this dumb world where you have like, you know, in philosophy class where you have to make the right choice about the trolley going one way or the other and you are really smart if you know how to parse complicated situations. It's actually about being the right kind of person. And the other point which I thought was very beautiful in the show was that the one character that is able to make a different wish every time is Madoka, but that's not because of herself. It's because of her best friend Homura, who's basically exerting all this effort to save Madoka from herself. And so I thought that was making kind of this other point, which is like, you know, it's both your own character, but it's also a function of your relationship with others. So, anyways, that's why I really enjoyed this point. We can dig in a little bit deeper, but maybe you can tell people kind of your Randian reading of this.
Yeah, before we get to that, actually, this ties in with Rand. Um,
Yeah.
there's really, I think the inevitability part, people shouldn't sleep on that. This idea that people are always making the same wishes, that these things are sort of foretold, that there's some kind of ambiguity of whether, like, of whether Cube, whether the cat who is like granting these wishes, um, whether it knows that it knows kind of what wishes they're gonna make ahead of time.
Hmm.
That's something that's like very like carefully left ambiguous, I think. But
Yeah, because they do ask him like, "Oh, should I wish for?" And he's like, "I can't tell you what you wish for," but he kind of already knows that they're gonna do it, you know?
yeah, it's like I
'Cause-
think it's known that he remembers the time loop, right? It's so even
uh,
if he doesn't remember, or even if he doesn't know, even if he doesn't have like the future sight at the very beginning, he remembers the time loop.
hmm,
He remembers like everything, um everything that, like, the characters have gone through.
yeah, yeah. And by the way, the inevitability is like this, you know, Homura, the one that's in the time skipping, she changes the timeline drastically. Like she goes back and tells them,
Yeah,
Cuba's
or
an
actually,
alien,
now that
don't make the
I'm thinking
wish.
about it,
Yeah.
maybe I have a correction, because I don't think that happens until the movie. I think at the very beginning, even Kyobe doesn't catch on. He doesn't catch on that like Homura is changing the timeline or resetting the timeline. It's
Well,
only after the movie that he figures it out.
no, so he does know because he remembers when they first introduced Kyoko, who's about to pick a fight with Homura. He tells her, he's like, I both created and did not create this magical girl because she's clearly a magical girl, but I don't know where she came from because I didn't grant a wish. So he knows that she's like this anomaly. They call her the anomaly, I think, for that reason, because
I
he knows
see.
that she's a magical girl. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's aware that there's like something fishy going on. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and
but
what's really interesting is like there's a kind of there's a very modern juxtaposition to this idea that people will make the same wish every time, which is basically the kind of like, determinism, or not the kind of determinism, that would be
Mm.
the opposite, but the kind of idea that it's just like, it's just your environment, right? That it's just, the circumstances around you, and that's not quite the case with the Madoka girls. Maybe it's the case for one of them. We'll get to that later, but
Yeah.
you have this. I think that you in the characterization, right? Something that's definitely for sure is that like the characters' personalities don't change across timelines. They're not.
Hmm.
They have stable traits, and maybe that's just like, that's just necessary for literature. But
Yeah.
I think that in some ways, there's the saying that like every war movie is an anti-war movie, right? Because you're showing the depictions of war, but in some ways, every piece of literature has to care about free will, right?
Hmm.
It has to care about the characters. It can't be like, a purely like stats table kind of understanding of reality.
Hmm.
But to put
Yeah.
it all together, there is like a grand narrative of Madoka. And the grand narrative of Madoka is something like, your choices will unwind you.
Yeah.
There's two girls in particular who kind of everyone recognizes as foils. Everyone, this is kind of like very well established in the show.
Mm.
Kyoko and Sayaka, and
Mm.
they have pretty similar wishes. Kyoko essentially wishes um, her father's church to become very successful. Her father then kind of goes insane from the like, mass following that his church acquires, and then Kyoko basically. I think the rest of her family is killed by his father. His father is a kind of like Jim, or her father is kind of like a Jim Jones character, and
Mm.
she escapes, and she goes on and decides to only fight for herself from now on.
Hmm.
And then her foil is Sayaka, and Sayaka has a similar wish. She has there's a boy that she's in love with, that she doesn't want to express her feelings to, but he becomes like severely injured, and he was like this like world class violin player, I believe, violin or
Hmm.
piano, but like
The
this classical
violin.
music, yeah, violin player, and he ends up getting severely injured, and the doctors are like, you might never play the violin ever again in your life. And they talk to each other. He tells Sayaka about how he wants this more than anything, about how he's um really resentful of like hearing classical music now, because he knows that his life will never, he'll never be able to compete, and he'll only be able to kind of like watch from the sidelines. And she eventually makes the wish to heal him. And after she makes the wish to heal him, um, her personality is kind of unwound, because she's still really timid um, to express her feelings to him. But he's also now in the kind of greater world, and so he's in the greater world. He's popular again. He's performing classical music again, and he kind of forgets about her. And the thing that this drives her insane, and this is like the ultimate spoiler of the show, right? Well, ultimate spoiler before the movie. But it drives her insane, and then she becomes like one of the demons that they're trying to fight. And it turns out that like these demons are kind of created when these magical girls go insane. And the exact way she's driven insane is very interesting too, because it comes from like the realization that uh she doesn't actually care to be a selfless person, that being a selfless person hasn't made her happy, and in fact has made her miserable. And has like, by making
Hmm.
her wish in a selfless way, she has like, she's not only like failed to win the heart of this boy, but has ended up like driving him away from her. And so the lesson there, it's kind of like,
Hmm.
an even stronger version of the lesson that Kyoko learns. And and the difference between them is kind of how they adapt, right? Kyoko just gets completely blackpilled and says, "I'm never fighting for anyone ever again, for anyone else ever again. I'm only fighting for myself." And then Sayaka doesn't do this. The way that she's actually driven insane, I mean, it's gradual and then and then sudden, right? But the way that she's actually driven insane is that she goes
All at
through this
once. Yeah.
process of like constantly fighting for other people, saying like, "Oh, if there's no one else to fight for, if there's no one else who will appreciate me, I'll still fight, and I'll still fight no matter how much pain I go through myself." And this eventually like drives her into like basically becoming a demon. Um, and how all of these
Yeah.
connect to Rand is that, we talked about last week about how Rand in her novels, like the characters are inconsistent, who are lying to themselves, who are not honest about what they truly want. Those characters are the ones who suffer the most.
Hmm.
Like the scientist, Dr. Stadler, um, in some ways someone who gets redeemed at the end, but like the one of the protagonists, Hank Reardon, is like this as well. She always emphasizes how it's like his own guilt that tears him apart and undoes him and destroys all that he's worked to build up. And it's a similar theme in Madoka, where it's the dishonesty about your wish that makes the wish so self-destructive, and that turns Sayaka into a demon.
Hmm. Hmm. So I think there's like a ton there, I think, in what you said. I mean, I think first on this question about free will, what I was going to say is I think a lot of fiction today, they take a they both take the, in the nurture versus nature part, they take kind of the nurture bit a little too seriously. And then they also have a type of butterfly effect type of reading of of nature. And so, they'll say, if you went back and like killed an ant, then maybe Hitler is never evil. And it's like all these things.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this is an anime that says like, actually, no matter how many times you could go
If
back
Hitler
and
got into
kill
art
Hitler's
school,
mom,
right,
he's
is the
still,
thing that people
yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah.
But sorry, go on.
And here they're, yeah, no, and here, like, I mean, some of these timelines are really crazy, but they end up making the same mistakes. And it's basically saying, no matter like the little things that you change, you're still gonna make the same mistakes because you're like the same person and flawed in the same way. So I think that was one thing that I thought was very refreshing. On the point about the self-deception,
Wait, I want to add
you
one thing
just,
to that. I want to add one thing to that.
yeah, yeah,
This
yeah,
does
go ahead.
seem like something that for a long time people have turned to the East for, right? Another very
Mm,
famous like genre-defining anime is Steins Gate, right? And this more than anything else is the core premise of Steins Gate, is that well, is that um there's two. They kind of got retconned, but the initial premise was like you can't change the future.
mm.
And then this gets retconned with the movie, and with the kind of like midquel. Do you know about this? The midquel,
So I've never seen Steins Gate.
like even the original.
No.
That's
I'm
amazing.
not act I'm not actually a weeb. So I end up watching anime because my best friend is in fact a weeb, and he'll just suggest things and then I'll randomly watch it. But it has no rhyme or logic to it. So
Okay, but yeah, at least before the retcon, the main premise
hmm.
is that like at the very least, if you want to change the future, you will have to go through at least as much suffering as as the timeline would have caused anyway.
Mm, that's an interesting one.
And
Okay,
this
I'll
gets
definitely
kind of
add this to my
retconned, and like
watch
people
list.
hate the retcon. Uh, but that's what happens, and I think that's much more uh, that kind of like predestination, Calvinism. That's, if anything, I associate it with Eastern media a lot more than I associate it with Western media now. It's the same thing with the three body problem, actually. This is like the main
Mm,
premise of the third book, is that everything returns to dust in the end. There is no
hmm.
saving civilization.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Oh, you
just have to
actually
let
finished it.
civilization commit suicide.
You actually finished reading it. I thought the third book was unreadable. The
No, the
first one
third
was
book
good.
is the best book.
Oh my God. Okay, I'll I have a friend. He's also a fellow over at the Hoover Institution, and he loves the whole trilogy. But I just thought Leo was really good at world building in the first world because it's basically our world today. The second one was kind of so-so, and the third one I was like, it's unreadable. I don't get it. I think he just had this to fulfill the contract. But
No, the third
I
book
gotta.
the third book is the least technological and the most political, right? But the third book is about like it's like the thesis of the Chinese state, which is like the third book is like civilizations commit suicide. How do we stop civilizations from committing suicide? That's like the way that you should be reading the third book. It's not, and I agree that it's like not the same as especially the first book. I think the second and third book really are like
Are
are a
one
series.
story.
The first
Yeah,
book is
yeah,
like a completely different book. It's like a thriller. It's not the other two books are much more literary, are much more about this kind of like gradual flow of society, um and these kind of like cultural trends and conflicts of visions. The first book is not about that at all. The first book is
yeah,
about like, the secret super secret, um alien stagnation murder mystery, right?
yeah,
um
yeah. I guess the thing I didn't quite enjoy about the third book is that it kind of was it tried to reduce these big questions about civilizational choices to like kind of this like what if you were like king for a day, how would you choose? And it's just it's fundamentally opposed to kind of what was revealed in the first one, which is like these big choices are kind of almost they're a function of the structure of society, and the answer is almost like predetermined in that way, right, by these things. So it
Wait,
it it, it
why
feels
do
a
you think
little
that the third book isn't the case? Because the story, I
that,
don't think the story is that the third book. I don't think the premise of the third book is that like the main character is just an asshole. Although that's also true. Like people hate the.
so what I remember about the story is that they have to flee Earth. The Earth gets destroyed. They're on these like they're basically escaping these recurrent like large scale universe wide kind of disasters. Like I think there's
Yeah,
another civilization that invades them.
they're like they're
Then like the heat death of the universe or something, and so they go into a pocket dimension. Like it's yeah.
Oh, okay, so you got
I
to like pretty close to the end. Damn.
oh did I? Yeah, I basically was like I paid for this book. I should probably read it.
Okay,
Um
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, but that's after like most of the main series. The main series is about like I think the like very narrow reading is about like, oh, the main character is just like an asshole and a terrible person, and you know like the last man or the last woman, a complete like, bug
Yeah.
person, and just a terrible human being. um but the thing that happens throughout the book, and I think the thing that's very prescient about like present day society, both in China and in the
Mm,
West, is that she gets elevated precisely for her vices. This is a
mm-hmm.
very constantly and very explicit theme throughout the book. And so I think it's really the most like systems commentary version. It's really the most systems commentary of the three, right? Like
Mm,
book 2 is about how the lone genius can save society, right? How like it's literally about like, it's literally about like the intergalactic teal fellowship and like this guy who wins the intergalactic teal fellowship and then invents the deterrence system that saves Earth.
yeah.
So like the book 2 is like the great man theory of history, really. And then book 3 is the one where like, civilization reverts to its suicidal tendencies and then, finally kills itself.
No, I did not think of it as a great man of history reading, but I guess you're right. It is like it's weird. It's like nobody thought of how to do deterrence, but you're right. He does invent that specific approach.
Wait, I don't
All
think
right, so
this
we
is
start
like
with
subtle at all. I don't think this is subtle at all. Cuz like the whole
mm,
premise of like the it's almost like a Rand novel, right? What happens in the second book um is that they create the intergalactic teal fellowship. They create the wall
Yep.
facer program. Everyone,
Yeah.
and then there's a
Us-
kind of moment of passion when this happens. There's a moment of passion when they first realize that, oh, like the aliens are going to invade Earth, and they
Yeah.
create the Intergalactic Teal Fellowship. And it's that moment of passion that is the only reason why they can actually believe in heroes again. And then over the
Yeah.
course of time, they stop believing in those heroes. They become like this kind of like stagnant, like, almost like, Camp of the Saints type society where they're just all pessimists. They all believe in like political or like, historical factors. They abandon the Teal Fellowship. They abandon the Intergalactic Teal Fellowship, and then one of the guys who was funded by the Intergalactic Teal Fellowship just like wakes up and solves the problem.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I guess the reason to me this wasn't like super insightful is because I have a mixed view. Like my own. So I guess for everybody else here, like I'm academically trained as a historian, so I've thought about these questions for a long time. And so to me, it was like it's naturally a mixture of both. I mean, even I think even Ted Kaczynski says the same. Like a line is going in one direction. Like all the fluctuations in a trend are irrelevant until one of them is not, and it's actually an inflection point. I mean, it's
yeah,
if you
but
look
that
if
I
you
think is
read
the
if you
core
yeah yeah
literary tension of the series. The core literary tension of the series is like this kind of will they, won't they of like will the few geniuses save this like obviously suicidal civilization.
mm,
It's actually
all
very
right
Randian, right? Or it's not like it's kind of
yeah
like
yeah
the
yeah
same premise as Rand, but with a different conclusion. Or I guess maybe by the third book, it's actually the same conclusion. But like the premise with Rand is that like you have this like the difference is of course like three body problem has aliens. um,
yeah yeah
but yeah, they're both these worlds where like civilization is dying, where everything feels broken, and then in the world of the three body problem, that's like kind of exogenous. It's kind of because the aliens are interfering with science, and it's up to the lone geniuses to save them, and they still fail to save them by the end of the third book.
yeah.
And
So I
then in Rand, it's like the moral story is that the lone geniuses are like kind of cannibalized by all of the people who are causing the suicidal society. And like the moral of the story is actually that if you're a lone genius, you should actively like hope for the destruction of these people instead of helping band-aid their society.
yep yeah. I mean, I think the way that all these three things tie in together is 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 basically saying things will go a certain way because the majority of people are moral cowards. They can't admit to themselves what they truly care about, and there's all these like nearsighted incentives. And so it's the flaws of character in the vast majority of people and the world that they inhabit that makes them this way. And the only way to change this is, in some ways, through the suffering of people that have decided not to be NPCs. And I've always defined like NPC and main character in these ways where it's I like if you think about a video game, right? It's like even AI controlled NPCs, they have very well defined um I wouldn't really call them utility functions, but they definitely have very well defined like ways of incentivizing or punishing their behavior, right? And so their behavior is somewhat predictable in a particular way. And it's
Yeah.
always the main character in a game that has this whole scope of freedom. I mean, you can go kill yourself in a game, you can do random stuff, you can choose to go through the pain of playing the whole game, right? Because the other players in the game don't do that. So it's like, yeah, you want to change something about the world, it's going to be very, very painful, and you're going to be alone. I think that's kind of the message of all these three things. And like Homura changes that for Madoka, and she suffers like for 10 years, like doing this thing over and over and over again,
Yes,
right?
exactly. There's this great tragedy, and it's reflected in Rand. It's reflected in the three body problem, and maybe most of all, it's reflected in Madoka.
I mean, in the Madoka case, they make it explicit. I think Cube says the reason Madoka is important is because you've respun this timeline so many times. And it's something like you've wrapped the thread of karma around her. And that's why her karmic potential is so big. And that's why her wish is so can be arbitrary, right? It's because you have spun this for 10 years, right? and that's what allows Madoka to make any wish that she wants, right? And that I thought was like very clever. It's like, oh, you're right. It's like the only way to really give someone a different option is, in fact, incredibly painful. And in some ways, it kind of reflects kind of what the other girls do, right? Like every time they make a wish for somebody else, they end up suffering. So it's like it's kind of the same thing. Like you're just gonna suffer if you want wish fulfillment. You're gonna suffer. I think it's kind of the the lesson of the show. Um,
Yeah, so
and
so the big question, this is the big argument that I have is like,
mm,
does um does Homura actually care about Madoka at all?
hmm hmm Well, I mean, they say that she's in love with her in the second movie, in the second arc, right? Where
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Um
so
but is that
I
like
mean, she
is that a
does.
lie?
She, I think she does. I actually think she does. Um, but so the it's a little bit complicated. Uh, by the way, so before I say why it's complicated, I was arguing with one of my best friends, the one who introduced me to the show yesterday. Um, where I asked them if he thought that if instead of magical girls, they were just, middle school boys, whether these wishes would end up being so complicated. Or would a teenage boy just say, a 10-year-old boy just say, I just want to be Superman? It's like these simple, like clearly, it's like, it's for myself. I just want to be able to fly. It's like
Yeah.
much simpler wishes, whether they have all this side effect. And maybe that's why Cube only talks with middle school girls and not with boys, because the boy wishes would just be kind of harmless in their own simplicity and kind of straightforwardness. The reason I
Well,
say
well, well.
it's
There's a canon justification for why it's girls,
mm,
right? Do you remember the canon
it's
justification?
that they're more emotionally unstable.
Yeah, because they suffer the most. They have the greatest capacity for suffering.
Right, but I think that's because, and again, maybe this is I mean, I do think men and women are wired differently because the selective pressures on the X and Y chromosome are actually different, even if it's the same population. Um, I think that evolutionarily women are basically forced to hold these kind of countervailing things in their mind all the time, right? That there's an innate desire, but then there's self-talk that negates that desire, and then the behavior is something complicated out of it. And I think that it shows up when you start hitting puberty, and that's why Cubate talks to teenage girls. Like if you talk to teenage boys, the wishes would be so straightforward that I don't think any of them would turn into witches. You know, it's like you wish to fly. Okay. So the thing that I said was complicated about Homura loving uh, Madoka was that there was a moment. So I actually, when I watched the series, I didn't know how it was going to end, and I actually kept thinking that the ending was going to be some sort of horror ending because it's at the end. I think Homer is fighting the big
Do you
bad
mean the end of the
monster.
the movie or the end of the first
The
the
series,
first series?
the
Okay,
series,
okay.
yeah, the series where she's fighting while Purg is knocked and her leg is injured and she's about to reset the timeline, I think, and she's wondering whether to give up, and she realizes that her giving up, realizing that she can't win this fight that she's had so many times, would lead her to turn into a witch. And so the only way to not turn into a witch would be to hold on to that hope that she would be able to win that fight. And thus she would be trapped in that timeline forever. Like basically the only way to not give into despair is to commit basically to an infinity of suffering, which is in some ways its own type of despair. So for a while I was unsure whether she was doing it exactly for Madoka or because she knew, because I mean she is very self-aware that if she gives up the fight she turns into a witch and she does not want to do that. So it's both, I think, at the first order level, or I think people call it the object level, like she does in fact love her friend and that's why she started this journey, right? But at the meta level she knows that without that purpose she would fall into despair, and so there's kind of like two level reasoning about her mission, you know.
So let me just give I'm kind of in between.
Hmm.
On one hand, I'm a kind of on one hand, I would like to be a Homura extremist. However, the way that I'm in between is that I think I think the real reading is probably somewhere in between the kind of honest reading of the show. But one extreme is that like she actually just cares about herself, and she cares about herself much more than she cares about Madoka, right? And she just wants Madoka in her life as like, a pet basically.
Hmm.
And and that she has this like obsessive compulsion about kind of ordering the world exactly. She's kind of like she's kind of the most autistic, right? She wants the world to be exactly ordered. And of course the strongest justification for this is the ending of the movie, because by the
To
end
be
of the
fair,
movie,
Cube is the most
this
autistic.
wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sure. But like by the end of the movie, this is what Homura actually wishes for, right?
Yep.
She actually like she becomes the demiurge. She becomes like the goddess of the new world, and like reshapes the entire world to like be her like snow globe of eternity, right?
Yeah.
So the argument goes like, oh, and in some and she does this by like in part negating Madoka's wishes, right?
Hmm.
So the counter argument is just that like Homura is the most greedy and the most selfish and the most like Randian character of them all. Randian, as in like actually agreeing with Rand. Um,
Yeah. No, I think that's. Yeah. I mean.
so go. One point I want to add to this is that like going by the
Yeah.
logic of the world, or
Hmm.
like the logic of the story, this is also why she wins. She wins precisely because she's not only the most selfish, but she's the only one who acknowledges her own selfishness. This is also like the ending song, right? This is like people don't translate this. There's no subtitles for this for like most
Hmm.
recordings of the anime, but okay, let me search Magia
We,
English translation. This is originally
but
introduced as the background theme that Magia Madoka Magica English translation. This is originally introduced as like the instrumental theme that plays whenever Homura is on stage. On stage, I mean
hmm.
like on screen, whatever. Um, it's not exactly right. And by the end of the movie, she just sings the song. I'm not sure if it's actually her VA, but it's like clearly. Um, Let me just put this in the space as well. I don't know how to put it in the space. Okay, let me just reply to the thing, and I'll
Yeah.
also DM it to you.
Is this the You mean the end of the movie, right?
Yeah,
You're
I'm pretty
telling me.
sure. Yeah, at the end of the movie, she sings the song. Um,
Oh, I think I might not remember this part. The music's great too for the entire show, quite
yes,
honestly.
yes.
Um, no, I mean I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I totally agree. I am a Homer maximalist. I think she's my favorite character, and I think her frustration with all the other characters are frustrations that have been mirrored in my own life, which is just like she's looking at them and they're gonna make mistakes, and she can tell, you know, the type of mistake that they're gonna make because they're not being honest with themselves, but she can't change it. Like she tries to help them every single time, and it like never works. And she kind of adopts this kind of resignation towards changing the fate of others.
Well, that's not
Um,
exactly what happens, right?
well,
The
in the first series, right? She first begins by trying to save everybody by telling them the truth about the wishes and Cube and stuff, and it backfires. And so
or
by
that's
the
true.
end that
You're right. You're right.
she's done the loop, and she's like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna save Madoka because she's the only one I care about." and I'm doing it for myself because she's the one I care about, not, and that's
Yeah,
it. And then she lets
exactly.
the other ones die. Yeah, and she lets the other ones die and says, "It's your fault. You deserve it." Which I think is kind of the moral education that the show is trying to give you. Is like bad things happen to other people because they deserve it. So you shouldn't feel that bad about it, right? It's like, I mean, this is also empirically shown. It's like,
Yeah, like they're
uh,
literally undone by their own wishes.
yeah, or
Every
like,
every
it's
single
like,
one of them, except maybe Homura, is undone by their own wishes.
yeah. Or like, I mean, the modern day equivalent of this, if we want to map it, is the position that you would say it's like, well, poor people are poor because there's kind of something wrong with them, and you're not allowed to say that in a lot of circles today. And for a long time, that was not not in polite company. But if you talk to anyone who's come from a third world like country or developing country, emerging country, whether in Asia or Latin America, they're like, yeah, poor people are poor because there's like something wrong with them. They're either stupid or greedy, have low self control, like it's clearly their fault. They deserve to be poor, and that's okay. It's not like a bad thing in and of itself. And I think this kind of comes out a little bit here. Um, but yeah. By the way, I was gonna say the link into Freyren. The reason this keeps coming up is Freyren tries to give you a lot of the same messaging, but in like a almost like more straightforward therapeutic way. Because a
Do
lot
you
of the
want to
time the
explain the
characters,
premise of Freyren, both for the audience
Freyren
and
is.
kind of for me?
Oh, you haven't seen it? Okay, so Freyren is. It's about this band of heroes. There's a warrior, a knight. Sorry, no, there's a warrior, a
I know
priest.
it's like D&D, right? It's like a D&D party, but they've won the game and then they're just like
Yeah.
figuring out what the fuck is happening now.
So it's actually more straightforward than that. It's because the first two episodes, yeah, it's about the band of heroes after they have defeated the Demon King. But the main plot thread is that the mage, the magic user, is an elf, and so she has a lifespan of like 10,000 years, and
This is
all her
Freyren.
friends are humans. Yeah, Freyren. And so all the friends are humans, and so then they die within like the first two episodes. They die of old age, right? The story just follows Freyren. And so I think like the main driver is, I think, as the hero of the party dies at the funeral, Freyren has this realization of like, I knew his life was so short, and yet I didn't spend enough time trying to get to know him. Because she basically was like, I'll see you guys in 50 years. And she comes back in 50 years, they see a meteor show, and then the guy dies. And she realizes how much that trip meant. It was a 10-year like mission to kill the Demon King, but for her, it's like, not that much time. Um, and so she's kind of trying to, in some ways, like grow and atone for that. Like she's helps other people get to know each other. She goes on this trip, which is the main arc of the series, which is going to the Northern Lands, where she gets to talk one last time with the spirits of the departed. I think she just wants to like say something to her friend. Um, but what's and she's written a little bit like a little bit autistic. Like all she cares about is collecting magic spells. She's not very emotive. She's not very like like she doesn't have a lot of emotional expression. And so her behavior is actually driven by experience and knowledge. So like she notices like her apprentice is really upset about her magic staff being broken. And she was like, "Oh, just throw it away and get a new one." And then the apprentice gets really mad because it was given to her by her like adopted father or something like that. But Farron is like smart, so she like picks up on some signs, and then she like fixes it while the apprentice is gone. And so it's like her actions are always driven by like kindness and her friendship and like very logically derived, but she's just very bad at emotional expression. So she's written a little bit like an autistic woman in some ways. So that might account for why this anime is so popular, I guess. A lot of the viewers
Yeah,
see
and
her as the
Freyren is
perfect
another one
woman.
of those shows which is kind of like about the dying world, right? About everything just like fucking sucking.
No, actually, I saw it the other way. So there's like a lot of levels to this. I mean, just on the quick on like the knowing yourself thing, which was the original link to Madoka, is the characters constantly say to each other throughout the series is, how do you expect people to know how you feel if you don't tell them? So it there's a lot of these situations where you have this thing where there's a misunderstanding, and it's like clearly you want somebody's attention, but you don't want to tell them. And then basically either Farron or these other characters just say like, no, just go say the thing that you actually want and see what happens. And if they say no, they say no. And like it's basically teaching you the lesson of Madoka, but in a positive way. It's not saying, you know, here's the consequences if you fail. Here's the reward if you do it right. Um, but the reason I say this is not about the dying world, it so there's the main story of Farron, but there's this kind of like world building saga in the background, which is really about the convergent evolution between, I guess, humans, elves, and demons. And I don't know if you want me to get into it,
Yeah,
but
yeah, no,
I
I'm
could. But
learning
it's
so
like,
much today.
so the thing about demons, again, this maps so beautifully to modern day discourse, and people have been getting riled up on the left about it,
Oh, I know what this
which
is. I've heard
means that
about
it's,
this from Twitter.
yeah, yeah,
Are
yeah.
do the demons ever become
So
not
there's a couple,
demons? Are they ever redeemable?
exactly. And so, but the show tells you they're not redeemable. You have to kill them and stop feeling bad about it because you're being stupid. So the reason that the show goes this way is, so there's like two types of creatures in this world. I mean, there's, or I guess all living things in this world, are organic in some ways, but some of them can use mana and then they use it and that becomes magic, right? And so demons are, I guess, evolved from some sort of, I think, originally aquatic maybe, but some like aquatic magical monster that learned to uh, mimic the cry of like children and other people to trick humans, and then it would devour them. And then over time, it just evolves to look like a human and to use human language. And by the way, there's actually a species of crocodile, I forget, somewhere in Africa, I think, where the crocodile will like dip itself, flip on its back, and put out its front arms in like a particular way that looks like a person asking for help to trick people to going into the water. So this is like not, unknown. Like animals will try to deceive each other. Um, and so the thing that you learn right away is that so demons look like humans and they use human language and they can even like emote human emotions, but they don't actually have any of those things because they're just trying to trick you using like words, right? And so there's
Hmm.
this flashback where there's like a demon girl, and she had just killed a a family or something and eaten them, and they're about to kill them, and she's like looking all beat up and whatever, and so the hero's about to stab her, and then the little demon girl just says like, "Mama, where are you?" And he just can't bring himself to kill her. And Farron tells the guy, he's like, demons are just creatures that use human language. You have to kill this girl. And the hero's like, well, maybe not. Like the mayor wants to adopt her and maybe, end the cycle of violence and we can all come to some understanding, whatever. Anyways, they try that. And then obviously the demon kills somebody else in the village and then they have to kill her. And so that's, I think, point number one in the show is that they show you like the disgust that you feel at the demons for basically manipulating humans and knowing that they're manipulating humans. Because the little girl says, "Oh, I just say like, Mama, where are you?" Because it's like magic words that keeps humans from killing me. Like I don't know what it means because I don't have a mother. She was like hatched from an egg and she never met her her mom or dad, right? So they know that they're lying, and to them, like these are just verbal, like it's like prom hacking and an LLM or calling someone a racist. It's kind of just like word magic, right? And something happens, but you don't actually care about the meaning. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two is that it turns out demons do have a social order, and it's driven by the way they manifest their mana to each other. Uh, and so the main character, Firin, and her human apprentice, what they've learned is they can manipulate their own mana expression to shrink down and look very weak. And so that usually tricks the demons into lowering their guard, and they can kill them. And when the demons, there's a few demons that realize that this is going on, and they have their own sense of moral disgust and towards Freyrin and her apprentice, because they're like, how could you do that? That is like wrong to like basically lie
Mm,
in
yeah.
this way. Yeah, and then as a human, you're like, what the fuck? Like, who cares? You're just hiding your mana. That's what you would do if you want to like kill the other. But then you realize that's how the demons think. They're like, yeah, I'm lying, but like, who cares, right? And so it has this very clear sense of like ethics as moral sentiments, and the moral sentiments are evolutionarily determined. So for demons, it's mana expression because that's how they form bonds with each other. And for humans, it's actually about language because that's how we form bonds with each other. And we feel the moral disgust towards people like hacking those systems. And so, basically it's like you're a demon hunter. Of course, you're going to lie in the demon way of lying, and the demons lie in the human way of lying, right? But it's incommensurate. Like there is no resolution to this because it's already like baked in your genetics. And that's what I like about the show. It's basically telling you you got to kill these things because they're hacking your meaning system, and your meaning system is the thing that makes you human. And so whatever their motivation might be, you have to kill it. That's what makes it evil because it's trying to kill you. So, anyways, and so the leftist backlash against all this is that they're saying that the demons are standing for minorities and immigrants and leftists. And someone was saying, why would the leftists immediately assume that they're the demons, right, in the show and not the
Yeah,
not the
yeah, yeah.
heroes, right? It's like, wait, they're telling us they're the demons. Yeah, so that's basically what's going on in that show, and I thought it was very cleverly done because this is a very complicated point. Like it's actually not subtle, like it's not simple at all,
Yes,
yet
this
it's
this
very
is a
important.
point that Carl Schmidt spends like several books trying to make, incompatible political orders, incompatible moral orders. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and in
and
some ways,
and
it's
what I
it's this point that's much more. There is a kind of biological adaptation to it, right? Like
hmm
this is a real instinct that people have. But the thing that happened, like we have like the uncanny valley, right? People are very
hmm
sensitive to things that look kind of human but not actually human.
yeah.
And one of the things that I think has, I don't know if it's caused a problem or it just is kind of part of the problem, is that the philosophy of this instinct has long lagged the philosophy of other instincts, right? I talk about Carl Schmidt, but there's just like, this is the kind of like elite human capital problem of like there
hmm
just are not as many conservative intellectuals, philosophers, whatever, to kind of make these arguments, even if I think these arguments are
hmm
true. So a lot of people like they
Yeah.
have the inborn instinct, right? But they don't have the like, you know, narrative justification for it. And so because of that, they feel like this instinct is somehow worse than the other instincts that they have, even if it may have more of a grounding in like survival.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I love about referring is it basically because this is a problem that I've dealt with in academia and then outside of it because
Oh, I can imagine.
um yeah, because for most of I mean, this is why I loved Rand. It's like so when I joined academia, right, I wanted to be a financial historian, which is already like, it was problematic because numbers are rationalizing technology and, it marginalizes blah, 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 blah. And it's just like fucking
Oh,
stupid.
really? Okay,
Like
damn.
my advice, like I transferred to Stanford from Harvard because my ex had gotten a job in Silicon Valley. But my advisor here is like a historian of the Chinese typewriter. And I think it's like literally within a month of me transferring here, he writes this op-ed basically saying that the keyboard is racist. Um, and it's because it takes away China's semiotic sovereignty because now you have to express Chinese characters through pinyin and a phonetic system rather than like writing them or something. And it's he says this is why the West thinks that China's not ready for modernity and technological progress. And part of me
What
was
year
like, are
was
you
this?
stupid? This was like, I don't know, 5 years ago. And I was
What, this
like,
was 2020?
yeah, it was like 2018, 2017. No, this must have been 2016. And then I think he made the same argument again in like 2018. Basically, this is the
2018.
interpreted method of the
2016
academy today.
was 9 years ago. Can you believe it?
I know it's wild. But the thing is, even at that point, we knew that the top most valuable tech companies in the world were like either American or Chinese. And he's just using examples from like the MC Hammer song of like Hammer Time and the keyboard, the Chinese keyboard or something. And just like you can always find cultural references to support whatever generalization you want to make. But I was
Yeah,
like,
it's just
bro,
obviously
no,
not true, right?
yeah, like nobody believes that China is not meant for modernity. I mean, they're literally the only pure competitor we have. Like, what the
Yeah,
fuck?
you know who like really can't who's really disadvantaged by the keyboards, it's the French. The French, they just like don't know how to type letters. Yeah, they're just fucked.
Yeah,
That's why they're so far behind China.
yeah. No,
But
so the problem that kept happening, I think for me in academia, because I had this way of looking at the world, which was fundamentals based. This is something we can return to. I mean, this is a topic of freeing, which basically says all that matters are the fundamentals. Like work on the fundamentals. In this case of magic, she's teaching her apprentice magic, like just two simple, like a defensive spell and then an offensive spell. And that's like basically all she trains her in. And it turns out that way she can defeat most people because most people have like flashy things that are more performative, but they don't actually win the fights. So it's that's like another lesson there. Um, but you have this problem of people that you know have been deceptive in the past before or are being deceptive. And there's this weird academic like virus that says, oh no, we have to engage with them in good faith because
oh
that's the
yes, I
rules
see
of the
this all
game.
of the time in DC. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, no, what are you talking about? Just ignore them. And in the Freudian world, it's when people say, there's this very powerful demon called Aura the Guillotine, and she basically takes over people's bodies and makes them do horrible things, and she builds an army of people this way. And she's been attacking a city for like 3 decades, and she decides she's like, hey, why don't I send a peace mission there? And so she sends some like fancy looking demons to be like peace envoys and negotiate something, and they're talking about their families and whatever. And it's all lies, obviously. And Farron's like, just kill them. Like, what? Why are they in the city? Why'd you let these demons in the city? And the ruler of the city's like, well, we're so tired of fighting, and I lost my son, and like, they're making very good arguments for like a way of coexisting with us. And Farron's like, yeah, but they're liars because they're demons. You need to kill them. Like, what are you doing? And I think this is what it's trying to tell you is like, this is a little bit of the rock paper scissor of sociopaths, normies, and autists, right? It's like the autist sees through the sociopath's deceptions. She's like, the winning move to deal with a deceptive enemy is to disregard all their communications, right? That breaks the incentive because you're never going to be good enough to like figure out what's true and what's not if your counterpart is being deceptive intentionally. So you need to just discount that and act as if it's all lies and then make a plan that way. And then that creates a more game theoretic thing because they will then realize that that's how you're acting and then it's less deception prone. But like the humans fall for that trick all the time. They're like, "Oh, the demons say they want to coexist. Let's explore it." And it's like, "No. Just do you know what I mean?"
Yeah, yeah. Uh
And the way that this shows up in academia is that so when I was at Hoover, they started a new fellowship program, which is a bit of like a junior track faculty position. And so, the Hoover Institution has its mission kind of advancing the values of a free society, free speech, free property. It's like very pro-capitalist. It's very right-wing
yeah, yeah, I'm
coded in that
familiar with
sense.
Hoover. Many good people there.
And and so the people that were applying, some people reached out and asked me for like recommendations or whatever. And I was like, but you're just like violent progressive, like you're just like violently progressive and you hate people here and you've said this before. But when they apply, they say, oh, yes, I care about blah, 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 blah. And I had mentioned this to people in the selection committees, like, hey, maybe we should ask them for like, uh, you know, they say they want to be public intellectuals. It's like, give me one instance in which you have publicly supported the values that, we support here at the institution. Just, an article or whatever, just a example of past work, right? And I was told by a senior scholar, actually two of them, they were like, well, we don't do like ideological purity tests here because that's illiberal. And part of me is just like, man, these people are lying to your face. And the only way I know this is because I went to grad school with everybody, and so I'm their friend, and so they forget that I'm also a conservative, right? But it's like I know that they're lying to you because they've explicitly told me that they're lying to you, and you're too like, you know, they're like, no, we should hear them out. Maybe they have. I'm like, no, you should just discount these
Yes, this
people.
is like the marketplace of ideas, people. There's no real marketplace of ideas. It's all fake.
Yeah, and it's like they know that, progressives have lied to gain institutional power in academia in their own respective universities before. And yet, in this instance, for some reason, it's all going to be like fully transparent and honest. Part of me is like, how do you think these takeovers happen? Is you don't actually say what you believe right away. You try to get the job. And then once you get the job, then it's very hard to fire you. Then you do the things that you want to do. Like part of me is just like, how do these people not think about this? Like they're brilliant economists, but it's like they don't see this. And it's just like I don't know if it's like a boomer defect, but to me it reminded me of Freyren so much because it's like they're demons, they're lying to you. That's it. Like you just discount the whole thing. That's how it works. That's the only way you stay sane in this world. But yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing is like I think with a lot of I think there are people who are kind of like overtly lying, but I also think to go back to the Madoka point,
People that
there's
lie
a
to
lot of
themselves.
people, yeah, there
Yeah.
are a lot of people who are lying to themselves and are just kind of like creatures of social status. And
Mm-hmm.
I think almost you don't like go far enough with the analogy to the demons, where it's like a completely different thing to them. Like they just don't have
Yeah.
a concept of truth. They don't even have like an internal concept of truth, right? They can't like tell themselves like, oh, strategically, what is true? And this is like often to their own detriment, right? They can't even do it when it would help them. Um, and their entire notion of like the pursuit of truth and of debate and of argument is like basically like social pleading and emotional manipulation. I think it's actually like
Mm-hmm.
it's even stronger to it's an even stronger analogy to what happens in Freyren, or like what you told me happens in Freyren. I haven't actually
Yep.
watched it, but it's an even stronger analogy than you're making it out to be, where it is this like completely separate notion of like what is truth, what does good faith mean. Like this is something that I always say is like, how do you characterize how do you know someone's not engaging in good faith? Is it past
Yep.
examples of lying? Is it um is it just like aggressively false claims? Is it a complete is it saying completely contradictory things, right? Saying one thing to one group of people and the exact opposite to another group of people. Like what is the red line that you have, right? And you're absolutely right that a
Yeah.
lot of the time these like boomer conservatives, they don't have this red line. They're these like completely like susceptible to manipulation
It's like
kinds of
they don't have a
people.
concept of like adversarial thinking, which to me has been
Yeah.
very frustrating because it's just like, don't you understand that your systems are hackable? Like these systems, these norms that you have come up with for a liberal society can be hacked because there's heuristics that are
Yeah, well,
very powerful.
I don't think they do understand. I think that it's a kind of uh in some ways they're rewarded for not understanding, right?
Mm, yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like, maybe it's like long-term destructive. It definitely is long-term destructive to the institutions, but to the individuals, like you survive in the institutions, that kind of benefits you, right?
yeah,
And there's like a real virtue to like not starting shit and being prudent and being patient. There's a real trade-off there. There's a real benefit, but like you have to have judgment, right? You have to identify, the correct scenario to apply, one standard, and the correct scenario to apply another standard. And a lot
yeah.
of people just
Well,
don't have that.
well, so I mean, this is why I was suggesting something like shows a, past instance of your public support of the values of this institution. Because all left, that's the one thing leftists cannot do because then they get canceled by their own crowd,
Yeah.
right? So I was trying to propose something that would take away the burden of having to discern in every situation whether this person was doing something good or bad. And I think that's the way that you get around this issue is in fact through scalable heuristics of this way. Um, like one of the things that happened, I think, it's something that you were pointing out, which I thought was really good, was that the way there are true believers and then there's like sociopaths that are lying to themselves, but there are some people for whom the emotional valence of the argument is the argument. Like, how could
Yes.
you let
Yes,
immigrant
exactly.
children die as they're coming in? And that's a very quote unquote like female coded way of analyzing the world. It's the longhouse, analysis here. But that's a type of argument. It's an emotional argument. And, male dominated institutions had a different, more linguistic way of settling these questions. And, the gap between them exists. It's not very clear, and that's why they get muddled together. But so in some ways, the analogy, you're right, like between like demons and humans is similar in the sense that the demons do have a sense of like truth that violating of which causes moral disgust for them too, and for them that's the mana manipulation thing. That to them is like
Yes, exactly.
absolutely like disgusting. Is like, how could you do that? That is disgraceful, and you should be ashamed, and you'll go to hell for that, right? And it's just like the other characters don't care. um so I mean, for leftists, there are things like this too. It's like, how could you not care about X? Like for some people, they actually mean that. They're like, how could you not care about the pain of
Yeah,
others? Like
it's
that
like
is,
all emoting, it's all like signaling. Exactly, exactly.
yeah. And then you rearrange the linguistic symbols to match the emotion, right? And so that's one way of being. But then you have people like I watch clips of the podcast of Gavin Newsom. I can't help but I actually don't think Gavin Newsom is like a true believer. I think he's like he probably knows he might actually not be that self-deceptive. He probably actually knows what he wants, and then everything else is just like a means to get it. And so I don't know. I mean, are the like
Yeah,
where
Gavin is
would
the
you class?
true. He's the true Homura. You know,
Yeah,
he wants to be the god emperor of the world.
yeah. But the thing with these people, I mean, the reason that I think my leftist friends hate Gavin Newsom too. And I've heard this. I actually had a friend that's I think what used to be Democratic Socialist of America member, Bernie organizer, and he told me last election, he's like, "Oh, if JD Vance was at the top of the ticket, I would totally vote for him." And I was like, "Well, that's different." And it's like, one, it's part of it is the revulsion to Trump, but two, it's there's an earnestness about JD Vance where he says, articulates very well what he believes. He's suffered in some instances for these things that makes him attractive to people. And I think for Gavin, it's the naked ambition that's, I think, off-putting to people. They're like, oh, you'll just say whatever you want. And it's the game theoretic version of it. It's like, I know you're just gonna lie to me to get whatever you want. So it's a very complicated game to have unreliable partners. It makes the game way more complicated than if you can predict their behavior. So
Yeah, I think with there's an idea in like traditional Christian morality that these things tear you down, right? That
mm,
it's not completely you, you know that it's not quite like the demons in Freyrin where, at least from my description, like the lying, like it just has no effect on them, right?
mm,
But with with real people, I think there are a lot of people who react in this emotive way and who are like, self-deceptive, but that actually destroys them, and that's like the premise of Madoka, right? Is that kind of
yep, yep,
self-destruction is inevitable, um, or at least inevitable if you actually get the things that you wish for. And
yeah,
yeah, and I think that that's generally true. I think that there's been a long time, there's been a hesitancy to have a morality of discernment, right? Of having a morality of
mm,
saying like these things, some things are better than other things. And in fact, like you should have both. You should see how it plays out in the world, right? And may the better belief win, not in the kind of naive marketplace of ideas way, but in a literary way. Like, in Madoka Magica, the way that this happens is that, calamitous things, people end up getting turned into, these witches, these, like, monster things, basically. um there's a real consequence to these things, and it's not mere debate. It's like, actually, the world will put your
Hmm.
beliefs to the test, and real things will happen, and real consequences will happen to you in the end. That's
Yeah,
like the metaphysics
yeah.
of Madoka.
I think that's right. I mean, so the it's the lessons from Farron are, I think, a little bit more like meta level. As you said, they're like the elite human capital lessons, which says it is okay to make judgments about groups, you know.
Hmm.
Doesn't make you evil. It's in some ways you have to articulate your own
Yeah, you
self-interest
have to
in
be a
this way.
realist.
Uh, yeah, and you can say, well, this population in general tends to do this, so it's fine to not want them, and that's okay. I think the Madoka thing, because it is all about humans, it shows that we have, I think, a little bit both of the demons and the humans inside, and I think that's what causes the tension. I totally agree with you. It's what I really liked about it was it shows the, as you said, kind of the Calvinist consequences of self-deception, which is like your wish is all wrong because you wanted the wrong thing. And so you could, in real life, someone could interpret this as
Wait, I
like,
don't think that's the
I
message at
said I
all.
wanted to be a doctor to help people, but in what?
Or okay, I think
I
with
mean,
your
I think
example
for
you'll get to the
in some
tension.
ways,
Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think so. In some ways, there's both an element of like the wish doesn't fulfill the thing that you truly wanted, and in the world it plays out incorrectly, and internally you have this like weird emotional repression, suffering thing, right? So, and we see that characters that don't do this end up happier. So they have that other friend whose name I forget, the green haired girl. Do you remember her name?
Yes, yes. Or I don't remember her name, actually. But
Nobody remembers her name. Yeah, she's a side character, but she's in love with the same boy that Sayaka is in love with. And she literally goes up to Sayaka and says, I know you like him. Kiyomi, I think is her name. No, is that right? It doesn't matter. It's some Japanese name that I forget. But she goes up and says, I know
she
you
and
like
she's
this
like a
boy.
total, like, nobody. Like, she has no magical powers.
Yeah, she never becomes a magical girl because I think she's the only one that's also in a weird way honest with herself. She says, I like this boy. I know you like this boy too. And you spent all this time with him when he was in the hospital. Because you're my friend, if you like him, you should go tell him that you like him and you want to date him, and I'll back off, right? But like, if you don't do it, I will go for it. And she does exactly what she does. And like, Sayaka could have gone and told the boy like, "Hey, I like you because my one of my friends is now a romantic rival and have to act on it." But she doesn't because Sayaka can't bring herself to admit that she wished for this boy to be better just because she wants to feel loved. And like, there's all this like self deception going on, and she's suffering and struggling with her desires. And her friend is like a healthy expression of it, which she's like, I want this guy, but I also am your friend. So, like, here's how I resolve it. I'm articulating it to you clearly, honestly, and I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Right? She's not even deceptive at all. So I think it's like the self-deception creates the emotional suffering inside the characters, which I think is really important to like note and articulate. It's like the self-deception will eat you alive inside. Like if you say, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people, and it turns out you never really wanted that. It's like what you really wanted was like the approval of your parents and like a status legible position for the rest of the world to feel like you're not a failure, then like these little things will come up over time. You'll be dissatisfied with your career. And I've had so many friends like do this. There's now that genre of like, Ivy League educated Asian doctors that quit their job and are now just doing hike streams. I mean, it's like it's a thing. So I think that's one of it. But the other one is just like the wish tends to be wrong, right? Because it's like you never truly go for the thing that you actually want. So it makes sense that the wish doesn't actually make you happy because you wish for the wrong thing.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
kind of what I meant.
I
That
get what
there's,
you mean by
yeah,
that now. There's an interesting
yeah, yeah, yeah.
tension. I think the way most people hear that is that, like, this is actually very different than Rand. So we can contrast Rand. I think
Mm. Yep.
Rand, like, if you want something that's bad, even if you're honest about yourself, you still suffer, right?
Mm.
Like, I think in some ways, like the scientist, Dr. Stadler, like he kind of knows what he wants. He wants to be able to do his research, and he wants like the funding, and he doesn't care what happens to everyone else. And he thinks people are stupid, and you have to manipulate them. And he's like kind of
Mm.
honest with himself, right? He's not honest with other people, but he's just kind
Right.
of like a bad guy, and that's why
Mm.
he suffers. And some of the communists are like this as well. Like Wesley Mooch is like this as well. That's why I think they have the
Mm.
confrontation at the end. Is he just wants to be like he just wants to assert like pure power politics, right? He just wants to
Mhm.
he like
Mhm.
takes over one of the like breakaway like Soviet style like people's parties at the very end.
Yep.
Um, and he's like and, and like bad things happen to him as well. I think that's not quite the metaphysics of Madoka, where like
Mm.
metaphysics of Madoka, the like ground reality of like what your wish is almost doesn't even matter, right? It's just whether you're honest with yourself. Like Homura is actually like an extremely evil person, right? Like she wants to become the dictator of the world and like keep everyone like basically stuck in a time loop forever. Like this is probably like not good for most people, right? This is probably like a terrible ending for the world. Um but she's just honest with herself, and she's honest that this is what she really wants, and in some ways she's more honest than everyone else, and she wins. Right, she becomes dictator of the world. She becomes like the god of the world, and like she's not
Mhm.
really punished. She's kind of punished at the time when she like is still like pretending to care about, or like is not honest with herself, and is like saying that she cares about Madoka, and maybe she does care about Madoka in this like messed up way where like Madoka is kind of the symbol of her being able to keep things the same for herself. But like by the end of the movie, she just like she's very honest about just being a selfish person. We finally get the lyrics to the song. Um and she wins, and she's
Mm.
rewarded
Yeah.
for it. You know, she actually
Yeah.
becomes dictator of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's it's like it's like the childish. It is childish wish fulfillment, right? Where it's like I wish everything remains the same and my friends are here forever with me, kind of thing. You're talking about the ending of
Yeah,
Rebellion, right?
but
Where
yeah.
she,
The ending of the movie. But like that's the point, right?
yeah.
It's a dumb wish. It's a fundamentally like stupid and like really destructive belief, and like totally unrealistic as well, right? But the
Hmm.
metaphysics of Madoka of like Madoka Magica is that like even despite all of that, despite her being like the actual demiurge, despite her being like a profoundly
Hmm.
evil character, she gets to win because she's the only one who is honest about her own desire.
Yeah. I'm trying to parse this because like I actually didn't think of her as evil in any like significant way. Um, is that a reflection of my own ethics?
I
Perhaps. I
think
mean,
in the original series it's supposed to be ambiguous. Like there's this whole mystery of
mm,
like who is Homura. She's the kind of like mysterious she's a kind of like stranger from the outside, the kind of Deus Ex Machina
mm,
character where you don't really know like what she's up to until the very end of the series. So I think in the
yeah,
original series, it's like it's intentionally uncertain. I think that you can tell by the end that you can tell that she's actually just kind of selfish. Um, but that's not obvious even by the end of the movie, or sorry, even by the end of the main series. By the end of the movie, I think it's very explicit. Like you can go to the song, she's like very honest. She like tells the reader this, or she tells the audience this, of like actually I just wanted her for myself all along.
yeah, yeah. Though what's interesting is again, I feel like there can be like multiple reasons for something. Uh, like I mean, I think this is what in some ways it's like saying this comes out in Inferium, by the way, too, which is like, do the heroes do good things because they're altruistic, or do they do it because they want appreciation from others? And the show is really explicitly saying, actually, you do it because you want both. Like, and they basically say like everybody like needs someone to praise them. That's just like a basic human need. There's nothing wrong with that. And so it's implied that like, Himmel was like a great hero, but Himmel also wanted people to know that he had saved the world. Like that's what he wanted too. And these two things are not in conflict. You don't have to be like, totally selfless to do good deeds. And what I was thinking about the end of Rebellion is there's a moment where she thinks that she doesn't get to escape the prison that Kyubey has trapped her in,
Hmm.
and so she would rather die than betray Madoka, right? Because she basically tells Kyubey like, "Fine, I'm just gonna die in this thing," and he's like, "But you're just gonna become a curse and like suffer and then die. Like, wouldn't you rather just see Madoka one more time, even if I then get to capture Madoka?" And she's like, "No, fuck you, man." And then she basically begins that prolonged suicide sequence, right, where she's gonna behead herself, and her friends have to like basically beat her up so that she doesn't kill herself. Um, I mean, in some ways, it's like I'm like I think she does care for Madoka, but she's also selfish because she also wants her for herself. And I think that's in the same way that like you want to save the world both because it's the right thing to do, but because you also know that it feels good for people to know that you saved the world. And I think that's it's like you can have two reasons for doing the same thing.
I think you're right. Part of the problem with this, well, this is both the strength and the weakness of the series, is that the way things
Mm,
work is like so distant from any concept of reality, right?
yeah,
Like there are
yeah,
just like no like realistic like resource constraints at all.
yeah,
This is like the main
yeah,
premise of the magical girl's wish. Um or like
yeah. I
almost
think
none,
that's what.
right? Like Kyubey cares about the heat death of the universe. But that almost
Yeah,
is like a side plot. Like the heat death of the universe is like a side plot to like whatever's going on.
yeah,
It's kind of
yeah.
crazy. So yeah, I think you're right that there are these kind of like dual beliefs, dual motivations. That's I mean just
Well,
in like the real world that's totally a thing.
yeah, and I think I mean the reason that you might emphasize one versus the other is it's kind of this point I think I made on Twitter to you, which was that like people forget that there's countervailing forces in the world and that it's like the net sum of all those vectors produces, you know, movement in a particular direction. But just because movement happens in one direction doesn't mean that there's no countervailing force in the other. And I think what literature tries to do is tries to create this, these weird contrived worlds where you separate all the vectors and then you see how they act, right? So the weird thing about the Madoka world is, as you said, there's like no like real world like constraints on these girls, so it does in fact just become about their emotional state and self-deception and honesty and like their own maturity about that, right? In the real world, it's like you have all these other constraints acting on you all the time, so it's like the actions would be much more muddled. But
Yeah, well, that's kind of part of why. Well, I more so say this about Goodnight Pun Pun actually, but I think the same is true for
mm,
Madoka Magica. One of the lessons is that you don't want to have the wish power, right? That the constraints of the
mm,
world keep you sane.
yep, 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 yep. Yeah, I think that's actually a good one. That's a really good one. By the way, I mean the other reason I think Madoka is so good and it's so well thought out is because each goddamn installment takes 10 years to write. Like they just take forever. So they're quite well thought out. Um, I was gonna ask you, I think I'd seen a post from you a long time ago comparing Cube to effective altruists, and I always thought of Cube as kind of a, Sam Altman character without the deception. Where it's like, even if you're just being utilitarian, it's like clearly this is a bad plan, like trying to harvest these very emotionally volatile creatures that you don't understand and you give them all these powers for whatever, preventing the heat death of the universe purpose. But it seems like inherently so dangerous. And in the end, you know,
Yeah, he kind of says
totally
this
undoes
like
him.
I'll never deal with humans again. This is terrible. And he gets like tortured by Homura by the end. Um yeah, it's an
Yeah,
interesting thing where he kind of wants to control society, right? He kind of wants to create this sort of like panopticon like system in which all of the magical girls are like killing each other.
yeah,
But yeah, you
but
also have this like, but he's supposed to be like, he's supposed to be like the creature, the eldritch creature half of the Faustian bargain, right? But you're right in that like this is one of the ways that like the movie really um subverts the trope, is that like, yeah, actually this is I think a really underrated uh point that I like haven't thought of until now, is like,
mm.
in a way, the lesson of rebellion is that like, yes, it was a Faustian bargain, but like, the evil creature was Homura, right?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah. I mean, the way my interpretation of it was like, this is like gain of function research. Like, it's not gonna end well. Like, what are you doing? But but you're right. It was a Faustian bargain for Cube. Yeah.
Yeah, like he's hoping for the if he's hoping to like stop the heat death of the universe, and then Homura just like comes along and like becomes God,
Yeah.
just becomes the
Yeah.
demiurge. It's like,
So
have fun.
I actually really like that reading because, people say that Cube is amoral, but he isn't. He's like the demons from Freyren, where he doesn't understand
Yeah.
human
This
emotions
is
because
okay. So
he's
this is a point. Or sorry. Go on. I'll wait. But this is really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, I was just gonna say. I mean, it's clear that by this moral, like basically, maybe all Japanese anime has the moral sentiments theory of ethics at its core, but it's like he doesn't have human emotions, so he doesn't understand what he's doing. Like, it's not that he's amoral. He has a system of morality because he cares about the heat death of the universe a lot, right? And he's willing to suffer for that. But he just doesn't care about the things that humans care about because he's an alien cat. Like, what do you expect? Like, of course he doesn't get it. But and then I'll let you say your bit. But I just to preface kind of my next thought is the Faustian bargain here is almost a little bit similar to what happens in Freyren. So the demons prey on humans, but the thing that makes humans different, and this is why Freyren is a little bit like Dune in some ways because it deals with these long periods of time. It's humans are not inherently very intuitive with magic, but they're very good at like scientific analysis. And the weird thing about the Freyren universe is that all the useful magic spells are basically developed by demons intuitively, right? And they use them against humans. And it's humans then that reverse engineer it and then add it to their own repertoire of things that they can use. And so there's this interspecies struggle between the elves, the demons, and the humans. And the demons are the ones that originate all the spells because they're very creative in that sense, right? And each demon focuses their entire life on refining like one new spell. And humans have really short lives and they die, but they innovate quite quickly. And so the Faustian thing here about the magic is the thing that allows demons to initially prey on humans, but then humans very quickly reverse engineer all these things and use them to basically hunt down demons. And then like basically that's what brings about the age of humanity in that show. But anyways, your point about Cube being amoral or not, I think you had something there that you wanted to say.
Yeah. It's This is just interesting as a kind of literary element that uh even this was one of the things that I think was most interesting about my review, link below. But one
Mm,
of the things I thought was most interesting is that even in this universe, and you can say it's because of the other characters, you can say it's because it's an attempt to win them over, but even in this universe,
mm,
Kyubey, it's only Homura that ever like points to herself as the ultimate reason for to justify her decisions. Even Kyubey says like, "Oh, I'm doing
mm.
it for other people," which is kind of
Yeah,
crazy, right?
yeah, yeah.
That
Because
even
yeah,
even the creature who's like kind of amoral is not like Well, I just want this. Uh,
Yeah. So, but I think that's what it shows is like no one's truly amoral. There's always a reason to do it, and you just have to tell yourself what it is. I like the point that you said that why does Cube point to something outside of him? So the interesting thing about the Cube species is that they're a collective hive mind. So there is no like concept of others. And yet he cares about the heat that of the universe, which is like a little bit like inconsistent of like either the hive mind came about because of like this like very expansive sense of socialization and caring about others before the mind meld happens, or that's probably actually the evolutionary history of that. You know the difference between reptiles and and mammals, right? Which is that mammals have like a part of their brain that is naturally intuitively in sync with other mammals of the same species and even other mammals of other different species, which is what allows for coordination. And so you see this when like otters go kill a crocodile. They, you know, individually an otter against a crocodile, it's kind of a predetermined death for the otter. But they go in as a group and it's like they kind of intuitively feel each other and then they manage usually to kill a crocodile. And from the crocodile's point of view, this is terrifying, right? Because it's like this mass of other things just going after you, and you don't understand how they're coordinating. And it's all intuitive. It's all like nonverbal, like, it's just mind melding. And so maybe in some ways, this is why mammals need to be around each other and you feel lonely and you need connection and you learn how to care about others. It's because of this instinct. And so maybe Cube is like the ultimate mammal expression is that you kind of just care about other things that are not you.
yeah, well, there are like examples of like real world, you can say hive mind like species like ants, right, or bees,
Hmm.
um, and they have very interesting biology as well, which is that they have basically much more, they have like more genetic similarity with their children than with their, or sorry, with their brothers, with their siblings than their children, right? This is what's known as
Hmm.
a eusocial
Oh, interesting.
species. And yeah,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so you get very different kind of evolutionary pressures. And some people argue that like this is this would be the kind of species that would basically be like more fit for communism, right? That a kind of beehive that sort of is like a
Mm.
communist military dictatorship, but that kind of works because of the biology and the incentives.
Yeah. I used to do this thought experiment. So there's a very famous poem called The Fable of the Bees, which is it's an allegory for capitalism. It basically says all these bees are doing things for their self-interest, but it creates the hive, and the hive looks like a harmonious hive mind. But in reality, they're all pursuing their self-interest. That's the original poem. It's from like 1700 or something. But I always thought about it. It's slightly different. There was a there was a book that I read called Economics that basically said that humans have like divergent senses of time discounting. So there's that it's hyperbolic, and so that there's kind of a time inconsistency in terms of how you pursue goals. So quadratic discounting is wrong because that's time consistent, right? If you care about something more than something else in the future, you quadratically discount to today, it's going to be the same no matter what point in time you are at. But if it's hyperbolic, you actually the lines cross at certain points. And that led me to think about kind of this idea of like inner conflict. I mean, in some ways, the only reason you have inner conflict is because you have kind of remnants of your evolutionary history within you. So there's like different instincts for different things that are in opposition to each other. And I kept thinking, if bees were like smarter, right? And they had more of an inner experience. So bees and ants and wasps, I think their ancestors were actually just solitary. They were not hive animals. And it was kind of this, even like solitary ants today, like are pretty territorial and so on. And so I always wondered, like, at one point in the evolution, does the tendency for collectivism outweigh the tendency for individualism? And does this create a very painful inner life for an ant where, 51% of the ant is collectivist, so it's a collectivist ant, but the other 49% really wants to do its own thing. And so it's constantly in a state of inner conflict. Like, wouldn't that suck? And I kept thinking, it's a dumb thought experiment, but it in some ways it's like a lot of human inner conflict. I think is born out of these like remnants, these like echoes of the past in some ways.
Yeah. There's um have we talked about Shinsekai Yori?
I have not heard that name before, but maybe you can
Okay.
tell me a bit about
So
it.
one of the premises of this show is that well, this is like not actually revealed until the very end. This is like the final spoiler. This is like literally the last
Oh,
spoiler in the show. Okay, I'll try to do it in a way without doing like the final spoiler. But there was
yeah,
basically
yeah.
a species of like sentient eusocial creatures that invent technology and go through like civilization. They're like these mole rats that have a queen, but they can like
Hmm.
speak, right? They speak Japanese. Um, everyone in the anime speaks Japanese because it's Japan. But
Yeah.
they can speak. They can use tools. They have like the first time the main characters meet them, they have like elementary military strategies. They kind of like speed run the entire like plot of the civilization games basically. um
Hmm.
and yeah, they speedrun civilization, and by the end they're like doing bioengineering, and by the end they get quite advanced. But one of the political
Hmm.
questions is like what happens at like a kind of political social organization level if a used social species learns to use technology. That's one of the like things
Mm.
that happens here, because like
Hmm.
they maintain their kind of like they're kind of like genetic relations, right? So they
Hmm.
still have this like ant like breeding pattern, but they're like a semi modern civilization.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Oh, that's
interesting
interesting.
things happen. We'll say that.
You should post a link, I think, as a to that show. I think as a reply to this one. It's I feel like the common thread across all these things has been kind of this. I think there's a few levels of this. I mean, one is the whether the it seems like both you and I accept the moral sentiments theory of ethics, which is like you just have these inborn instincts and basically you refine them into a theory of ethics, and that's your ethics. So that's one. And then I think we explored the nature of the human system of ethics about external honesty as well as internal honesty and clarity about desires, all these things. But then we've done these very interesting side quests into, well, what if things were different, right? So you have the demon society, you have this eusocial society of the mole rats that you described, the cube society, and why those systems might be different. And I think what's really interesting is that I think a lot of these alternative species, like ethics and moralities, are in fact also like moral theories in our human universe that certain thinkers have put forth. And I think that's probably why they seem kind of off. Like utilitarianism seems off because you're like, it just feels wrong. And I think in some ways that's like good enough for a lot of these things. Or as I told people, it's like effective altruism feels wrong to me, and I think that's a good enough reason for me to doubt it. In the same way that like, a lot of other modern day causes I think are just like overthought in a way that does away with the internal consistent like resonance of the whole thing. So yeah.
Yeah. um I think we might have a listener question, comment, or something. By the way,
Hmm.
I'm getting a bit tired out, so I might
Yeah,
kind
same
of bring
here.
this to a
Yeah,
close.
this
But
let's do it.
hello, it's Ram 10. How's it going? Questions, comments?
Yeah, pretty interesting conversation. Now, you talked about a few minutes ago about the hive mind aspect uh, of organisms operating in coordination. Now, I think I've read a research a week before where it found that human beings have been constantly decreasing their brain size for the past 10,000 years, just for the sole reason that we are more collaborative, and everybody doesn't need to focus on everything like surviving and gathering food. And thus human beings have like delegated all these responsibilities to other human beings, which sort of makes us even a total macroorganism altogether.
That's
Ah,
interesting. So what I've heard, or what I've read published, or this might be a difference in timescales, because of what I've read published is that um, head size has been increasing in recent years, mostly because of like nutritional factors, right? So this wouldn't be evolutionary, but just the mother receiving more nutrition. And you could say that some of it is like selection from maternal mortality, decreased maternal mortality as well from C sections, drugs, just like better medical care. Um, so in the short term, and I say short term is like hundreds of years, but in evolutionarily in the short term, uh, head size has been increasing. Maybe that's not true in the order of magnitude of like 10,000 years.
I think maybe what Isram was trying to get at is that since I assume the 10,000 years mark is stand-in for the agricultural revolution, right? And it's basically saying that humans that would have not survived in a hunter-gatherer system because they have to be more independent can actually survive in an agricultural society. And they're, perhaps less intelligent or less alert or less all these things, but they can actually survive whereas they would have died before. And that's what accounts for that. But I don't know how big these effects are, by the way. Like, did we lose 10% of our brain mass, or is it just a smaller percentage?
I think what matters in brain is like the
Mm,
amount of folds we have in our brain that makes it possible for neurons to communicate in better configuration. So I mean, they dissected Einstein's brain, but they didn't find anything unusual. Like they found that it is just unusually more folded than the rest of
hmm
us.
Yeah. Well, maybe this will be my final closing point as we wind this down. It's the the thing about the there's this idea of genius that comes up in Frerin a lot, where there's like a debate about whether some accomplished people can be geniuses or not. And the the philosophy that the anime and the manga seem to espouse is that the genius really comes from like a very focused mastery of the fundamentals of a discipline, because the fundamentals are the piece that is in touch with the base reality of that discipline. And so, one could argue, and so basically, you get these geniuses in the show. Of course, they have inborn talent, but it's like they just have very, very, very focused approach to what they do. One could argue that Einstein. I mean, people have made this argument before that it was like Einstein's ability to like think in his own specific way and really spend a lot of time on that by taking these like sinecures at the post office and the patent office and so on are what allowed him to make his breakthroughs. If you put him in an environment of modern day academia where you have to publish or perish and repeat the the general consensus to even keep your career, maybe he would have not come up with those breakthroughs, I think. So there might be a lot more to the practice of this than anything in it.
I mean, the great man theory just works in case of like science, right? Because
Yep.
here's this person that comes along with certain discoveries, and it just blows up from there. Like, for example, Boltzmann with his discovery of entropy. I mean, nobody
Yeah.
believed him. He killed himself, and I mean, before you go, I just want to make 2 points from my observation earlier. We were talking
Mm,
about ethics and about. I think I think I generally agree with the sentiment of thinking about the heat death, even it's like billions of years ahead. But
hmm
it's like it's a question about long termism, right? Because if you look at our collective effort, since the beginning. It's like controlling more and more of the surrounding that we reside in. So
Hmm.
naturally, if the universe is inherently against us, I mean, we human beings are basically full of imperfections. We die, we get sick, but we are a being better than others, and we control our surrounding extremely well. Like each movement that we do, it's against going gravity, and
Please get to
it's
your
all
point
sorts of
quickly.
things. And yeah, I mean, yeah. First point and second point, I just want to appreciate that I really love the coverage of SB 1047 and the perspective of institution by Schmidt with Brian wrote what Brian wrote earlier. So that's
Yeah,
Oh, well,
I'm
thank you for that.
glad you like the Schmidt writings. Glad you enjoyed the um, coverage. But neither of those things are really what the space is about. Um, all right, Manny. Any closing thoughts about Madoka
Uh,
Magica?
no, I mean, I just had, I think anime really is and manga, I think is the interesting. It's a very interesting cultural resource, I think, in our society, because I think at least in the U.S., the dominant media and entertainment forms are dominated by different values. So, um, just be true to yourself and don't make Faustian bargains, I guess is kind of the lesson. But
Don't
it's one
make
of my favorite
Faustian
shows.
bargains with Homura. Don't trust Homura.
Yeah, no, but I highly recommend everyone go see it. I recommend it to people, but it's like there's this bias against magical girl cartoon, and I'm like, it's not really
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but whatever.
One thing that I'm really hoping for is I think this generation is the generation where, in the West at least, where classical comedy comes back, where this idea that like
Yeah,
you're gonna depict these people who are suffering as a consequence of their own actions, as a
yeah,
way to really tell a story and as something that is like something that is greatly pleasing and greatly satisfying to a great number of people,
yeah,
both aesthetically and morally.
yeah,
I think that's coming back.
yeah.
And I think that's probably the most important development in really art as a whole that we can hope for.
Mm,
Thank you
that's
everyone for
true.
listening. And thank
Thank you,
you,
Brian.
Manny, for joining in. This was fantastic.
Really enjoyed it. See you guys. Take care. Have a good weekend.